Now, so let's begin with the first of the series, and this has to do with what do you do before you begin. Now, Abraham Lincoln is known to have said, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first four sharpening the axe." Now, in most endeavors in life, preparation is the key to success. So, what I will do in today's session is just go through some of the very preliminary steps, things that you can and things that you should consider before you begin your investment journey. I would also say that in addition to what I share, you should always seek professional counsel before making an informed, formal offer on a property. Now, before you view a property, you should endeavor to understand as much as you can about the property's location. So you want to understand is what I call the adjacencies. You'd like to understand more about the street, including the buildings on the street. And if you could, it's always useful to find out as much historical information as you can about the area, the local demographics, and then finally the property itself. Let me go through each of these very quickly before we get started. Again, remember what we are talking about here is the preparation steps. You like to understand more about the location. You may have heard real estate is location, location, location. In addition to the location, is you like to understand its adjacencies. What is around the building or the property or the plot? What street is the property on? Are there any historical information that you can glean from? What is the local demographics, especially if this is residential purchase? And then finally, the property itself. Quite simple, basic steps. Now, in order for you to begin the journey of investing, like anything, we always begin with defining the vision you want. So the first step should always be for you to make a detailed description of your ideal home or your ideal purchase. In order to get what you want in life, you first have to decide what you want. I like to think that there should be a vision. You should have an ideal vision of your ideal investment. Ideally, that should include features that you would like the building to have. Now, it's perfectly fine to be flexible in your expectations, whilst retaining some specificity in some areas. For example, your maximum purchase price is something that should be specific, especially if you're purchasing the property with the aid of a mortgage. You should have an idea about your maximum purchase price. Your preferred and your shortlisted locations could be slightly more fluid. Now, the presence or the absence of certain features, such as a fireplace, a garden, a garage, could be even more fluid. That is something you can negotiate and you can choose not to have. But there should be some items that are identified on your vision. You should have an idea about what you want. So the first step is always to put in writing what you want. And if you can, especially this applies to first-time buyers, if you can, you should have a vision board of similar properties that are comparable to your ideal property. Now, many people would say that the ideal property that they want or they wish to own It's in their head, and as soon as they see the property, they would know. Perhaps, you could be right. I still believe that a blunt pencil, is better than the sharpest mind. So, step one, decide what you want, write it down, and then remain an opportunist. Make a detailed description of the property you want. In this case, we'll assume that you're in the market to buy a property and you have already seen a few properties. The second step will be for you to review the property's particulars. Now, this is something that is provided to you. It could be something provided in the form of a brochure, or something on the seller's or the agent's website. But keep in mind that a property particulars is not designed to provide a comprehensive overview of the property. Rather, the purpose of the property particulars is to provide you with sufficient information to arouse your interest. So, as an investor, when you study the property particulars, the first thing you should look at, and this is what I do, is I look at the building's exterior photographs, or the building's floor plans or elevations. And the reason I do this is so that I can observe the property's beauty, its form, and its architecture. Now, once I've looked at the exterior and the elevations, my next step is then to look at the floor plans. The floor plans help me understand the design arrangement of each space. It helps me understand the layout of the property, the symmetry, and most importantly, it helps me understand the functionality of each space, the utility of each space, and the flow of each space. You will notice that in buildings, there are some buildings whereby the way the building is designed, it has a flow that works. There are some other buildings whereby the flow is somewhat complicated. So pay attention to two things: the exterior, so you can observe beauty, form, architecture; the floor plans, so that you could understand layout, symmetry, functionality, utility, and flow. Now, once I have gone through these two steps, only then do I proceed to look at the interior photographs of the property. Now, if the front elevations and the layout meet your requirements, then it doesn't matter so much on how the interior looks, because everything internally can be improved cosmetically. I tend to follow these steps to ensure that I objectively appraise the opportunity without getting emotionally attached to the interior decor. That is step two. Now, step three is to carry out a visual inspection. I should say virtual inspection. A visual virtual inspection. You notice I didn't say carry out an inspection in person. And the reason is because as a result of great advancements in technology, you can carry out virtual viewings of a building in any country, or rather in most countries in the West. And you can explore in detail. And let me use Great Britain, for example. You can explore in detail most streets before expending the money, the time, the energy on an in-person site inspection. So carry out the virtual inspection before you visit the site in person. Very important. Don't waste your time, don't waste your energy, don't waste your money if you can see the property virtually. Now, Google Street View and other 3D platforms provide panoramic 360 degrees interactive services. These services are free. They allow you to obtain and see the property visually, both from the exterior. You can see the building's adjacencies. You can see how the building is positioned in relation to others in the street. You can see even major points of interest around the local area. Most agents also provide you with internal 3D virtual tours with walk-through options. Such services have become, fairly common, especially in the last 18 months during the shelter-in-place requirements across the whole globe. As a result of that, it's possible for you to filter properties that are not to your taste and your liking before you spend time going to see a property. Now, once you've looked at a property virtually, the fourth step is for you to carry out a bird's eye view. This is simply a satellite view. It provides a broader perspective of the building, its local area, and it can help you. In my case, it helps me identify a few things: major roads, train tracks. Now, train tracks are important because of noise and vibrations on the soil. It helps me identify train stations, bus garages, schools, airports, shopping centers, or any unpleasant or unsightly points of interest that are in close proximity to the building that I have an interest in. Now, all of these buildings have something in common. They are all prone to higher traffic, noise, and higher air pollution. And the purpose of carrying out a bird's eye view is so that you know whether the property you're looking to buy has a train track running behind, or has a bus garage behind, has a large supermarket on the opposite street, whereby you have too much traffic movement and pollution in your area. Now, once you've done all of this, you can move to step 5. Step 5 simply means you look up the local council's website. There's a purpose behind this instruction. The purpose is for you to quickly search on the council's website for planning applications, those that have been submitted or approved in the local area or in close proximity to the property that you have an interest in. Now, ideally, you want to know what is being built in the area or what is planned to be built. And the reason for that is so you understand how future developments will affect the value of your property, including, and this is particularly important, including the infrastructure impact on the local area. Now, always keep in mind what we call the supply and demand relationship in property investing. If an area's long-term supply of properties exceeds the demand, then the area is poised to have excess capacity. If there is excess capacity, that could lead to a fall in home or rental prices. Now, the opposite is also true. So it's very important to always keep in mind what the council is doing and what developers are doing in the local area. That's number 5. Number 6 is similar to number 5, which is here in Great Britain, because we have very old period classical buildings, What we tend to find is that some properties are located in what we call conservation areas, or some properties are listed. They've been given significant architectural status. And so number 6 is for you to check if the property is in a conservation area or if the property is listed. Now, if you do this, and there's several ways you can. The first is for you to contact the National Heritage or contact your local planning authority, who can tell you that, when the property was constructed, how far it extends, the reason for its creation, the level of legal protection it has in place. I share this simply because although conservation areas mean some additional planning controls and considerations are necessary, some of these considerations protect specific locations and specific properties. Now, if a building is listed, or if a building is in a conservation area, it could mean that the house that you're buying may have special controls. And those controls could restrict the type of work that you can do to the building or the property, with or without planning permission. So for example, let's assume you found a great property. It's an existing commercial building. You intend to convert it to a residential building, but the building has significant historical, architectural status. There could be restrictions on what you can do. If you are buying a building or a house for further development, it is very, very essential that you check the local authorities' websites to make sure that you understand whether there are developmental rights that might restrict the type of work you intend to do. Number 7 is quite easy. That's to read the legal documents. Now, if you're purchasing a property directly from a seller and without any intermediary, it's possible that you could ask the seller for a copy of the contract document, the lease document, or the freehold document, and you can do this in advance of making an offer. If, on the other hand, you're buying via an auctioneer, and the auctioneer is acting on behalf of as an agent on behalf of the seller, then all legal documentation will normally be provided in advance. So that negates the need for you to ask for the lease. On the other hand, if you are buying a property through the normal purchase process, in this case via a sales agent, such documents will not be freely provided in advance, but you could still ask. I always recommend that you read the legal documents thoroughly, and most importantly, you seek professional representation in all legal matters. In Great Britain, the most important aspect of the legal process is to check the title register to ensure that the building has no liens or charges, and also to ensure that there are no other third parties who have a claim on the property. Now, a legal representative can help you identify all of these items. The 8th item will be for you to confirm the legal status of the property. Is the property a leasehold or is it a freehold? And also, if it's a leasehold, what is the duration? Also, if it's a freehold, what is included in the freehold terms? Now, there are 2 main ways of owning properties in England and Wales. The first is by freehold, or rather, Let me rephrase that. The first is by freehold, and the second is by leasehold. Now, freehold simply means that you own the land and the building that sits on it. Now, there are some leasehold houses, so do not assume that every house is a freehold. But usually freehold means you own the land and you own the building. Leasehold means that you own the flat or the house in part or in full. But the land that it sits on does not belong to you, but instead you have a lease which gives you the right to occupy and use the property and to share with other users specific areas of the building or the estate. Now, the lease is transferable, and every time you transfer the lease or every time the building is sold, the length of the lease reduces with time until the lease is extended. So sometimes you might find the lease for 99 years, 125 years, or 999 years, or even less. The whole purpose is that you have a finite time during which you have access to use the building or certain parts of the building based on the stipulations in the lease document. So pay attention to lease documents. Now, it's important to also remember that there are some mortgage providers who have restrictions on the minimum number of years that a leasehold building or leasehold property must have. For some mortgage providers, it's 80 years. And if you found a property with fewer years left on the lease, you should always bear in mind that there will be a premium that has to be paid for the lease extension. And sometimes the extension of the lease could be more pain than the gain to be achieved by the extension. So pay very close attention to your lease for leasehold buildings and the duration left on the lease. Very important. Take your time, read the lease carefully, understand exactly what is included in the lease, understand what is excluded, understand what you've set yourself out to acquire, understand what is exclusively yours, what is shared, and also it's important to itemize the services that the landlord will provide, but also the costs that you will have to pay for the provision of such services. From my experience, the wordings in leases can vary from building to building or from property to property. You should always pay close attention to the specific wording in your lease. The lease always details all of the agreed terms of ownership. Now, in the subsequent sessions, or in one of the subsequent sessions, I will provide you with questions you can ask in relation to a leasehold property. So do not worry too much about that now. Let me conclude with number 9. Item number 9 is that the final step you should make is a very quick estimation of what I call the relative market price of the property. Now, I will go into detail on how this works, but the purpose of this is so you can eliminate. So first of all, so you can compare different properties, and secondly, so you can eliminate those that are disproportionately overpriced. And then let me use perhaps a useful example to illustrate how this concept works. It usually is best to use examples. In my experience, I've seen properties on the same street that have sold at what I call similar. They've sold at similar absolute prices, but very different relative prices. The absolute price simply means in pounds. So for example, a property is worth £1.2 million or property is worth £500,000. That is at an absolute price. So you can see two properties, both of them are 1.2 million or comparable. The relative price is the price of the property scaled to its floor area. So it's pounds per square meter. So you could say the first property is 1.2 million, but 200 square meter. The second one is 1.2 million, but 150 square meter. Always keep in mind and always bear in mind that it is not what you buy that makes a property a good purchase or a good investment. Rather, it's the price you pay. The price you pay is always reviewed on a relative basis. It's an important time for me to just explain that it's possible to find an excellent property, but it's a bad investment if the property is bought at a price far in excess of its intrinsic value. And similarly, you can find an average property that is a good investment if you buy it at a significant discount to its intrinsic value. So the idea of this exercise is for you to just understand, and this serves as like a filter, so you know which properties are overpriced and which properties are underpriced on a relative basis. Now, don't be put off if the price is marginally higher than your budget. In one of the sessions to come, I will provide you with various ways to make a property that may be overpriced, how you can make it an attractive opportunity nonetheless. And one of the ways you do that is by negotiation, by value enhancements, or by improvements. In my experience, the ideal way to invest in properties is to find a great property in a great location with long-term growth trends so that your invested capital can be allowed to compound over time, over a long period of time. And sometimes that might necessitate that you pay a little bit more than your budget, providing the total purchase cost is still below the property's intrinsic value. Now, I'm going to stop today's session there, and I think it'll be useful for you to take into account everything that has been shared. Now, if after you've done all of these steps, you are still interested in the property, then the next step is simply to schedule a visit, which is what we will discuss in the next session.